All right. We're set.
Good.
Okay. Hey, Cary, how you doing?
I'm great, thanks.
Excellent. Why don't you go ahead and tell us who you are and where you're from and what you do and all that good stuff.
Great. Well, my name is Cary Crum. I was born and raised in Reedley, California, in a small agricultural community kind of southeast of Fresno, about 25 miles. The big claim to fame there is they are the peach and nectarine capital of the world.
Yeah.
So all the stone fruit in the valley pretty much comes around that area. So I was raised there. I'm a crop consultant with a company called AgTechnovation, which is a South African-based company that is a precision ag fertility company here in the valley. And I just recently taken a position with them to run their California operations and to expand what they're doing with their customers. Formerly, I was at a company in Madera the last 6 years called California Ag Solutions, and I was a crop consultant for them. I ran their South Valley operations for fertility products, crop consulting. I specialized in irrigation management, tillage management, cover cropping. There's a new type of agricultural practices, which really they're not new, they're old, but they're new again, called Regenerative Agriculture. And I led that department for them and basically focused on helping large-scale growers implement practices within their farming operation to help improve their soil resource.
Oh, yeah.
So that's basically what I did. In a nutshell, I'm kind of an agent for change. I come onto the farm and really work with them to make changes within their operation, which can be really challenging for them because farmers do not like to change.
No. Well, like I said, they're the best. They're the best business people because if you aren't that good of a business, you aren't in farming. It is really tough.
Correct, and it changes all the time. And it's funny. The farmers, they get it from everywhere. They get it from the government with regulations. They get it from the suppliers with input costs, with the labor, with the lack of labor, the labor regulations, the air emissions, the water quality, everything they have to deal with. It's amazing, how dynamic a farmer has to be in their business and all the things he has to deal with every day.
Oh, yeah. And as you know, a lot of farm companies out here have been around for 80 years or something. They're long time, mom and pop organizations. There's a lot of that out here in the San Joaquin Valley. And, they know their stuff. I mean, they've gone through generations of people and their kids and everything. I just saw somebody I knew, and they were celebrating their 80th, and they've gone through like 4 generations of kids.
Sure.
To get where they are today. And they are far. They've done very well for themselves. But like you said, there's big peaks and valleys with farming.
Well, and one of the big challenges you see now is if you look at the change that happened between 1950 and 1980, there wasn't a whole lot of change. There was a little bit of change. But if you look at the change, so I'm 54.
Right.
So, and I graduated from high school in 1986. So
now, you went to Fresno State, right?
I went to Fresno State, and I actually got my degree from Fresno Pacific a little later than I should have. But I spent the first 25 years of my life in the fresh produce business.
Yeah, you know.
So, but what's interesting is if you look at the amount of change since I graduated from high school between 1986 and today, it's crazy. And even the last 15 years in the change, if you look at when I was going to college, the computer I had took up my whole desk.
Yeah.
And now I've got a computer in my hand, in my iPhone, that is more powerful than any computer I've ever owned.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Technology has really, really changed, but the fruit is kind of mostly all the same. There's different varieties, and there's weather-resistant crops, and this and that. However, it's the same stuff we've always eaten and stuff. So,
well, I think the biggest challenge with that in regards to fruit has been, in the 80s it was about we got really involved in being able to ship fruit across the country. So sometime we went through this big stage where we started picking stuff a little greener. And so when it delivered to the grocery store, it was like hardware, which made the retailers really happy. But when the consumer would get them home and they eat them, maybe they weren't quite as good as Grandpa's peach tree in the backyard.
Shelf life.
Yeah. So I think in the last 15, 20 years in the fresh produce business here, at least in the soft fruit business, and even the grape business, there's been a tremendous resurgence back to taste. And that's been a big change. Again, it's funny how we in our life everything is old and then new again. So before it was about taste, and then it was about shelf life. Now it's back to about taste, and that's something new. Same with these regenerative agricultural practices. These were practices that were done in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s before Roundup came came into play,
Right.
and then
Monsanto.
Monsanto,
Yeah.
and now when we look at now we're bringing these soil health practices back again. It's just doing the old stuff again, but now it's new. It's kind of
So it's recycling.
it's recycling, yeah.
That's interesting because of all this high tech and stuff we have now.
Well, and then the other thing is, everybody that's not in farming thinks they understand farmers and how to help them make money.
Absolutely.
And these farmers have been making money on the ground or scraping by, unfortunately.
They've been trying to.
Yeah, for decades, right? And they're really good businessmen. But yet now you've got some software engineer up in the Silicon Valley is deciding that if I can give this grower way more information, he can make all these better decisions and make all this more money because farmers are kind of dumb. And I'm going to help them out. And they come down here and the farmers just eat them up. It's just not even close.
No, I know. I've dealt with a lot of farmers and they know their stuff.
They do.
It's like they're like, so how many people do you see a day? Everyone thinks, well, I'm the only person that walks in a farm company. They're seeing a lot of people a day. Right.
Well, and the sad part is most of it's funny in the ag business, there are a lot of salespeople. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of really good sales problem solvers. And so the farmers get a lot of people walking in their door trying to sell them something, and they get very few people walking in the door trying to help them solve some problems.
Exactly.
So when they get someone that does come in and actually listen and talk and understand and help them solve problems, it changes the way they interact with those people. So there are a few people that do that, but unfortunately the mass of the people that farmers see are just sales guys trying to throw a pitch,
What I say, the tough stay. So there's a huge turnover, as you know. In that sales process, people don't last long because these farmers just eat them up.
They do.
And they're not prepared. So it's if you can be strong and stick in there and learn, then you're going to do well. You're going to make friends and solve problems, like
right.
you said.
Exactly.
Now, what I'd like to do is understand kind of what you do.
Sure.
And your process from beginning to
sure.
The stages. So how do you begin?
Well, the biggest sales tool that we have in the ag business is the steering wheel on the pickup.
Absolutely.
Right. So you can't social media your way into an ag business. I mean, a lot of people think they can, but you can't. It comes down to you're driving down a road, you've done some research, and you got to turn that wheel down that driveway and go and meet the grower the first time.
Yep.
And you're one of maybe 15 people he's seen this week. Yeah. So you're nothing special, right? And you're just wasting his time. So the trick is to try to, do a little research on the growers you're going to meet, find out a little bit about them, what the crops they're growing, which is easy to find out now. There's a lot of tools for that. And typically, like if it's a tree nut grower, almonds or pistachios, or if he's a dairyman, I do a lot of business with dairymen. I kind of know what their pinch points are, and so when I walk into them, I can kind of speak their language quickly and ask them if I know their neighbors.
Yeah.
I drive through the areas a lot, so I know what's going on typically, and so I know they're having a problem. So I can come in and ask them, hey, are you getting the kind of yields out of your corn that you're if it's dairyman, are you happy with that? And always usually the answer is no. Typically, they can always be better.
Yeah.
And so then you start asking them, what kind of challenge do you have? Do you have salt problems with sodium accumulation in the soil? Are you having irrigation problems? Everybody has irrigation problems now. So lack of water. So it's really trying to establish kind of a quick rapport with the grower to let him know that I do business in his area. I understand what problems he's maybe having, and I might have a couple of tools in my toolbox that could help him.
Okay.
So what I do from a crop consultant basis is I kind of start with the soil health, and most of the row crop growers here in the valley are using heavy tillage. It's the practices they use, ripping and disking and land planing and cultivating. So these are very very high disturbance tractor passes. And when you do this over and over and over again to the soil, what happens is you actually start to eliminate the organic matter that is accumulated in the soil.
Yeah.
And then it changes, and that organic matter really is the carbon that has been sequestered back by the plants. So you just incorporating the plant material back into the soil.
Right.
But when you do heavy tillage, it kind of starves the microbial community, and they'll start to eat that organic matter and burn it up. And so the lower the organic matter drops, the harder it is for the plants to get the nutrition that you're putting in the soil. It's harder for it to hold the water and retain it. It doesn't host as many robust microbial communities that helps us with our water and nutrient cycling. So it really kind of beats the soil up. So a lot of times when we start with a grower is just trying to look at what condition his soil is in, and often a lot of times the growers don't even really know what the issues are with the soil, because the crop consultants they use aren't focused on soil health. They're focused on inputs and selling them stuff.
Yeah.
So when I come along, I try to start talking about his most valuable resource, which is his soil, and there's not a lot of people that come and talk about that. So already I start to sound different because I'm asking different questions. Then we start to ask about his tillage, and if we could reduce his tillage passes, is that going to save him money? And always the answer is yes. If we could increase the soil organic matter that's in the soil by changing some of these things, and you could hold more water in the soil, the irrigation water you're applying, is that something that's important? Oh yeah, definitely. So if you could reduce your fertility inputs and get the same amount of quality and yield out of the crop, that's something that's important. And usually the answer is yes. So now you've started to ask the questions that he's not used to hearing.
Right.
And so then we begin the conversation. Well, how are you going to do that?
Right.
So then that's when we start working through the process, and it's a long process. This is normally what I'll do is I'll go to a grower and say, why don't you give me a little test block? Maybe if it's a dairyman, give me a 80-acre block and let me do it my way.
Yes. Small. Yeah.
Earn our way in. And one of the tricks that I use is, the one thing that I've learned about is, whether it be farmers or people, there's two things they love to talk about. They love to talk about themselves, number one. And number two, especially, they love to talk about their problems. Yeah. Because nobody cares about their problems typically. Yeah. And so I'll ask a grower, why don't you give me do you have one block that just is terrible? I do. I just got this one field that just doesn't produce well. Why don't you give me that one?
Yeah.
Well, why in the world would you want that one? Well, because nobody else can help you with that. And if we can make some changes if I can show you that we can do better here, then imagine we can do on the better side of the property.
See, that's a really good way of doing things, because people think that they have to get the whole thing.
Correct.
And that never.
And I hate that, to be honest.
Well, it's fair too. On the other side of the farmer side, it's like, I'm not going to give you this whole thing.
Right. But a lot of people come in with that expectation, and what I've always tried to get growers to understand is, like, I'm willing to earn my way. Give me your challenging piece, and I always usually give them a little tweak though, and I'll say, if you give me your worst field, why don't you give me another little field that's kind of more average, so you can see what I can do on the problem, and you can see what I can do on your better ground. Right. And 9 times out of 10, that happens. They're willing to give you that go, because again, I'm not just they're asking for all this stuff. I'm not just peddling a product. I've got this special water penetrant that we're gonna give it to you, and it's gonna solve all your problems. And in 9 times out of 10, the solution to a problem is about a system, about a lot of different things, and it's not just one thing. There's no one silver bullet that you can do to fix a problem. It's a whole host of changes that you can do to start to make improvements. And growers, they resonate with that. And then what's funny is, so you start asking growers all these questions about what they are doing, and oftentimes they don't always know. They don't know the condition of their soil. They don't know exactly how much they're spending on fertility. And you start asking these questions, and then they go back to their normal crop consultant and start asking these questions that they're not used to them asking. And the crop consultant gets real defensive. It's like, well, why are you asking me all these new questions? You must have talked to somebody. Yeah. Well, yeah, I got this guy that came, and he's asking me these questions, and I don't have answers, and I don't like that. Yeah. So that's kind of how it happens. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So does it start with a soil analysis? And if so, how is that done?
Yeah, so normally what we do is we go out and make the initial conversation with the grower, and then we identify that maybe there's a block or two that we could try, and I always come back to them and say, look, why don't you identify a couple blocks, and then give me your soil analysis from the last one you have, whether it's this year or even last year I can use.
So they usually have?
If their consultants are up to date, they should have a yearly soil sample. That doesn't always the case.
Yeah.
And I've run into a grower down in the Cary area where I went and met with him, and we went through this process, and I said, I'll come back and get a soil test on these 2 fields. Okay. So I came back to him and I said, hey, he said, what would you say? How new do the soil samples have to be? I said, a year, maybe 2. He goes, what if I told you I didn't have a soil test for 5 years?
Whoa.
I told him, I said, to be honest with you, I said, I'm not the guy to work with. I'm really not.
Yeah.
I said, if you have a soil consultant, you have a consultant that is selling you fertilizer every year for 5 years and no soil analysis, see what's there, I would say that you need to find a new soil consultant because he's not doing you the job you should do. And I wish I could tell you that this happens a lot, or it doesn't happen very often, but it happens more than you think. And these kind of things. So normally I would come back and I would have him give me a soil analysis. I'd go back and go through all the problems in the soil, and then from that I would build a season-long budget for that test block, and then go back to him and go through the budget, explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, explain his soil situations to him, and then get him to approve the budget. And once he approves the budget, then we're done with the sales process. At that point now it just becomes about execution. And so then the season is already set, the block is put in place, and so then we just have to execute through the process and be with him every step of the way. So that's, and then, unfortunately, the scorecard is at the end of the year. You either outperform his standard or you don't. And knock on wood, I'm probably about a 90% being able to outperform their standard. And it really comes down to just this: making a few changes and then paying attention to the details. Because a lot of these farmers, what they'll do is they get into a standard practice that's easy across the board. They have a consultant that's giving them advice and kind of a one-size-fits-all program. And when we come in, all of those fields, they're like individual businesses. Mm-hmm. And we have to look at the resources for each one and modify it. So when we apply this level of management to it, 90% of the time, we make much better results. So that's kind of the way we work.
It has to be a very detailed thing because you're doing different crops.
Correct. And each crop is different.
Yeah, like you said, you're heavy, or you like the dairy industry.
Well,
right?
I do a lot of dairy.
You do a lot of dairy.
So the crops
How's that going?
The dairy business it depends on the day.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's big here.
It is, and those guys are constantly under onslaught.
It's tough.
And the prices are bad.
Yeah.
The expenses are high. The labor's bad. It's just they get it every which way. So I do a lot of dairy practice. I do processing tomatoes, a pretty good amount of business on. I do tree nuts, pistachios, and almonds. I do alfalfa hay. My new role will expand into more crops that I have some familiarity with, but I don't work with them a lot. So I have a team that's underneath me that does citrus, table grapes, wine grapes, those sort of crops too.
Yeah.
So, the dairy is just a good example because those guys, you really you have to understand the business they're in. They're in the business of making milk, right? So if we can improve their crop quality and quantity, then they can make more milk with less feed. And if we can reduce their cost in that way and reduce their cost per day per head to feed,
sure,
then we can reduce, and if we can improve and at the same time reduce their cost but increase their milk production, then it's an exponential return on their investment. So they're, dairymen are always looking for something better because it's
more
expensive.
for less.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, I think every farm is in that position.
Well, they have to be, or else they aren't in business.
Right. Well, and then the other thing too is a lot of like I have a tomato grower on the west side that has a big problem with a weed called morning glory. And it's a viney-like weed that is it's Roundup resistant. It doesn't like to die.
What does it look like?
It looks like a vine. It looks like a vine with flowers on it, and it'll take over a tomato field easily. And as time has gone on, this plant has gotten worse and worse and worse because the chemicals don't control it. So we did a trial with a large grower, and we put a big multi-species cover crop on this field. They leave so many fields fallow every year.
Now explain a cover crop.
So a cover crop is an additional crop that you would plant after or before a cash crop. So like, for instance, processing tomatoes would normally, maybe you would plant, they would grow wheat one year for grain, for flour.
Right.
And then they would harvest that in the summer, and then that ground would sit empty. And then in the winter, they would work the ground and prepare it for tomatoes, and then they would plant the tomatoes in March or April,
sure, and
then produce the tomatoes next year. And then the next crop after tomatoes might be cotton. Yeah. So it's this crop rotation.
Yeah.
So within a cover crop it's another crop that's not really designed for cash sales, but it's designed for soil health. So we're going to come in and we're going to put you can plant one species like a barley or a clover or something like that, or you can do a multi-species. The multi-species would be like an oat and a vetch and a pea and a flax plant and a cowpea and sunflowers and radishes and okra and cabbage and all these different things. So you have this big multi-species blend. And when you do that and you put that on the ground, each of those plant species stimulate with their roots a different set of microbial communities to feed them. So the way the plants work is when the leaves are like solar panels, and as the sun hits them, they process the water and nutrients to photosynthesize, and then they pump this root exudates, it's called, but it's this root juice, for simplistic term, out the end of the roots, and that is specifically designed to feed the microbial community around the ends of those roots. And then as they're feeding the sugar that comes from the photosynthesis to the microbes are now then go out into the soil and collect up nutrients and bring it back to the plant so the plant root can absorb it so they can do more photosynthesis.
Sure.
So, but each of these plant species stimulate a different set of microbes. Okay. So let's say that if you plant a barley, which is a grain, and you have a whole big stand of barley, and then that barley will feed all the microbes in the soil that feed the barley. So it's really good for the barley microbes, right? But when we now add a sunflower and a flax and a pea, now we have 4 different plants feeding 4 different microbial communities that are mining the soil for the same nutrients. So when they do that, they'll actually go and release more of these nutrients and make it more available for the whole community. Right. So it's kind of interesting how it works. But when you do this,
symbiosis.
It's a symbiotic relationship. Yeah. And so when you do this, you also start to realign and reorganize the microbial community in the soil, and we get it to be more robust. And it also allows bad soil microbes, or like soil diseases like Fusarium is one, and they become dominant. When you reorganize these communities, it makes them just one of the crowd, and it reduces the bad population and increases the good population.
Now, does that affect that weed you were just bringing up?
So,
how does that,
correct. So I was getting to that. So that's the cover crop process. So so these guys, the way they manage they put their ground fallow for a year. They don't grow a crop for a whole year, but this morning glory will grow pretty much with nothing. I mean, if you a little water, and it'll keep, because the roots are down 6-7 feet. So what we did is we tried something different. Okay, so this bare ground, they were spending upwards of $200 an acre a year to control this weed in this fallow year. So there's no crop income, and they're spending $200 to make this weed
an acre.
Ooh. So what we did is we went in with a cover crop, a big multi-species cover crop with like 12 things that grew aggressively.
Yeah, you had a plant.
And we planted it. Yeah. We planted it in the early spring when there was a little bit of rain, and we got it established, and then we let it grow all summer and just left it alone, let it die. It just died. So it covered the ground, but interestingly enough, we left on this field, half of it was the normal fallow practice with the $200 an acre. Yeah. The other half was a cover crop with $60 worth of seed and $40 worth of water. Or $80 worth of water. Okay, so we spent $140. But when at the end of the season, when they went to plant the tomatoes the following year, they noticed that where the cover crop was, there was no more morning glory. It was gone. Didn't grow. Yeah. It didn't like the competition. So when you leave a lot of these plants, nature likes to be in balance. Yeah. So if you, my old boss Monty Bottens used to always say that if you don't choose the weeds you want to plant with a cover crop, nature will choose its own cover crop for you, which is one you don't want.
Yeah, you don't want
right? That. So this is a way to change the process and change the cycle. And when we change the cycle, the weed pressure went reduced way down. And that means when we spray Roundup on the soil, it's really harsh on the microbial community. And it's expensive. Yeah. And it's time consuming. Oh, and so this was a way to use nature to basically combat a problem that we had developed in the farming system by letting it become dominant. So it's I know it sounds strange, but you know how when we talk about society, a diverse community is better than a community of all one type of person. Absolutely. Well, nature's the same way, right? They want to be in balance. So we don't want dominant things in nature, that nature seeks to be in balance. Like another example I always use is, if you look at the most powerful ecosystems in the world are old growth forests. When we go up to the mountains and we're walking around, do you just see a forest with great big trees and nothing else?
No.
No. You see big trees, little trees, bushes, shrubs, vines, it's this community of this diversity that makes that productive. And so when we are in agriculture down in the valley, we have to understand that we're in the same position. It's if we can reintroduce biodiversity back into the system becomes much more healthy and gets back into balance and becomes more productive than it has been. So that's kind of the process.
Yeah, I would think with the cost of $200 an acre, those guys would go crazy.
They would go crazy.
I mean,
yeah. But the biggest challenge isn't it, so you would think that the dollars and cents would be enough. Right?
Yeah.
You know, the biggest hurdle was the management didn't like seeing this fields looking messy, because when the neighbors drive by, they see this messy field and they don't understand, what are you guys doing?
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
And so it's about negative peer pressure, right?
Wow.
And that became the biggest hurdle, was it looks bad, or we're going to have all these other problems, or we're going to have these other things pop up. But what's interesting is as we let time go on, we started to see results, and they started to realize, you know, this is something that is beneficial to the soil and beneficial to the operation, and we can actually reduce inputs. And so all of a sudden now, even though it looks a little messy, it makes bottom line profit look real better, much better.
Yeah, I bet you they were real happy about.
They were actually, and they were surprised at the results.
It took time.
It did, and it's you got to kind of slow.
Yeah,
it's a slow process, right?
Yeah.
Right? And the other challenge is when you bring these kind of changes. I always tell people that my growers that they always call me the crazy guy, because I come with crazy ideas, and then what'll happen is I'll come in and do some crazy ideas that I know the risk we're taking. I understand the process, so it's not really that risky, but they think it is. But then they'll get some risky idea that they heard from somebody else, and they'll come to me and they'll say, "Oh yeah, we're not going to do that." Because why not? Because that's just stupid. We're not. I do crazy. I don't do stupid. There's a big difference. So you can do stupid things that really can cost a lot of money really quick.
Oh, yeah.
And when you do something like that, the grower will be done with your process for a long time. Usually a whole generation.
Oh yeah.
You know? Yeah. So you'll do it with do it with the dad, and then the son comes along. "Hey Dad, let's do some cover crops." "Nope. Your grandpa did that. That was terrible. I'm not doing that."
Yeah.
You know, it didn't turn out at all. And then the son's like, "Well, come on, let's give it a try." He goes, and so you have to wait till the dad kind of retires, and the son will like, "Hey, let's do a trial." And before you know it, you're back to the races with him again.
Yeah.
So
well, you call it crazy. I call it out of the box thinking.
Correct.
Yeah.
I call it crazy to the growers because they get it just like that, and they're like, you know, they're the ones that tell me I'm crazy, and I always the way in my work, the way I know I have a grower really where I want him is when he tells me, you know, that is crazy, that'll never work here, and then we go out and show him that it does work. Yeah, because when I until I push the grower to that point, I know that he's still grasping on to the old, and if we can just get him to try the new. This new technique and watch it work, he will see the benefits before I do.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's funny because they will come to me with what they're seeing before I even see it. They'll say, "Hey," because they walk those fields every day. "Hey, you got to come here and look at this. This is amazing. You planted this stuff and it's out of the ground, and the morning glory's not there.
Yeah.
We don't know where it's at." And so you come out and look, and sure enough, so those are kind of pretty rewarding.
Wow.
Moments.
So have you had any other successes like that before?
Yeah, no, a lot of So we again, what I do to farmers looks risky and crazy, but in reality, I mean, I understand how it works. And when you put these systems together, we have experience with them to understand how they're going to work and where the problems are going to be. And 9 times out of 10, what I do is try to tell the grower, explain what's going to happen before it happens. That way, when he sees it, he doesn't get upset.
Yeah.
And again, I'm super finicky about trying to make sure that we have success, because I can't fail, because if I fail, then we're done. So they don't give you a second chance typically. You know, when you fail the first time out, and some of this stuff can fail, and a lot of times it fails on the execution side with the farmer. He'll never admit to that, but in reality, sometimes that's what happens. You know, the planter guy didn't run the planter correctly, or they when they watered it, they didn't get the water to the field fast enough, or there's these other things that you can't control. But I do our best to try to make sure we
see, that's the deal with you. So all these things that are being done that you aren't involved with, you still have to manage that.
Correct.
And make sure it's done, or else you fail.
Exactly.
Okay. So it's like, this is going on, and then you call a farmer, hey, did you get this done?
Right.
Or you go look, or however you do it, however your process is. But you have to manage a lot more than what you're pushing
to be successful. Yeah. And because if you don't manage those things, and it takes those extra steps, and we shouldn't have to do that, but sometimes growers in their operation have a disconnect between the reality of what happens on execution and what they believe happens on execution. And we see that happen between what the grower, sometimes what the owner tells us, and then we get down in the nuts and bolts of the labor force and realize that we have to take all these extra steps to make sure it does happen in a timely fashion, even though we may not even mention to the grower, because it's interacting with the irrigators, interacting with the tractor drivers, interacting with the field foremans at that lower management level, because those are the guys who do all the work. So the grower says, hey, we get this done, no problem. And you get out in the field, it's like, then that fertilizer's been sitting out there for about a week and a half. It was supposed to go out last week. Oh, well, the irrigator was sick last week, and we had a new guy, and he didn't know.
Oh,
so now you're stuck with so you still get the fertilizer out, but the timing model to make it the most optimum return on investment is passed.
Yeah.
And so whose fault was that? At the end of the year, it'll be my fault because it didn't perform.
Yeah.
But in reality, hey, we didn't get this out. We missed two irrigation applications with fertilizer, and we missed the timing. And that wasn't my fault. That was your fault. But you can't tell that.
No. So the water deal. So how do you do? Yeah.
I don't know.
You're just throwing up your arms at this point, or what?
This whole water thing is just an absolute disaster, and I don't know if you could even, if 20 years ago we sat down and said, can you think up the craziest lack of water scenario that you can think of for growers in San Joaquin Valley? Yeah. And I don't even think you could think this up. That's how crazy it is. You have water being pushed out to the ocean through the delta, and it's contracted to come to the South Valley, but they can't deliver on it because the environmental concerns, and the fish are more important than people. And politics are involved, and you have the federal government telling them turn on the pumps and pump the water, but the state government says no, we're not going to do that because we don't have to, and the growers are just caught in the middle, and they don't know what to do. And it's what's really going to happen, and we're starting to see it now, is the commodity prices for food are going through the roof.
Well, fertilizer.
Well, too. but so this. I mean, they're all related. So so first thing is the water is not there, so water is expensive. Right. So now you have to raise the commodity price to get the growers to grow it. So then they get a higher commodity price, so they're going to come out great, right? And then in the last year, the fertility inputs and almost all the crop inputs have more than doubled. So now you've got a little increase in the price, and you've got a doubling in the input price. Yeah. So the grower's back in the squeeze again. And what people don't understand is when you raise the commodity price by 20%, that's like 35% on the shelf of the grocery store.
Right.
And I have West Side growers in the Westlands Water District that are leaving this year half of their land fallow that would produce food. So not only are the commodity prices being paid to the farmers higher to get them to grow, but now they're growing half of it. So where's all the food going to come from in the country? You were talking earlier about how there's a disconnect between where people think their food comes from. Yeah. It doesn't come from Vaughn's. Right. It doesn't come from Winco. No. It comes from the field. Yeah. And the issue right now could be that we could see food go up 40 to 50% next fall.
Oh, yeah.
And it could be hard to get.
Yeah.
And so here we have the biggest agricultural system in the world, in California, and we could be short of food.
Oh, yeah, failing.
Crazy.
Yeah. The infrastructure in the water is just amazing. And I did some deep diving on that, and I found out that there's all kind of water in aquifers all over the place. But what happens is there's one in the Mojave Desert. They sue each other.
They do.
And then it just goes boom, and it's gone for 5 years, however it is. But, there's a lot of water around. And then, I was looking at the fish and everything. It's like, well, why don't you just make fish hatcheries? You could put them right next to this place.
You could.
Yeah. So what they did was I looked into it, and they haven't done anything for decades as far as holding water.
Yes.
Yeah, they let go of water. They say they have to and this and that. But how much water can you actually hold and retain depends on the infrastructure of what you have.
Well, if you look at, I can't remember what year it was when we passed a big water bond back, I want to say 7-8 years ago, that was supposed to fund 2 dams and put and add some height on some others to increase our storage capacity.
Mount Shasta.
And none of that has happened. But where did the money was collected?
Yeah.
Where did it go?
The general fund.
And so here we are. 8-9 years down the road, and we've got no new water resources. I don't think there's been a dam built in California in decades.
That's what I mean. I ran in. I talked to Visalia Farm Bureau, and her uncle was an engineer on Mount Shasta when she was a little kid.
Sure.
And she said that was it. It was like, no, we don't need it anymore. But, we're done with the infrastructure.
Well,
whoa.
And the challenge we have now, that really where the farmers are in the big pinch is we've had droughts before with a reduction in allocated water, no surface water, but they've been able to pump what they've needed to pump.
Yeah.
But this is the first couple of years now where we have a drought combined with the restrictions on being able to pump water out. And so, I have a lot of growers that are leaving ground that normally have good water resources that are being restricted by their irrigation districts to pump X amount of water, or they're getting a big bill. I have a dairyman down in the Pixley area that last year got a water bill after doing his farming for $150,000 at the end of the season for water that he had to pay to pump.
For the water or electricity?
For the water.
Yeah,
so
then there's that.
They billed him. Yeah. They billed him for the excess water he used out of the ground, which is over his allocation.
Whoa.
And then he had to pay $120 an acre foot to pump it out of the ground. So he got hit with a double bill. But they're a dairy and they have to feed those cows. So they don't have a choice.
Yeah. You can't make a cow.
And then everybody thinks that drip irrigation is the magic solution, and it is good. It does produce higher return on the water resource, but the one thing it doesn't do it doesn't percolate a lot of groundwater back into the soil. Right?
How's that?
So when we flood irrigate, there's excessive water that goes across the field. We lose some to evaporation a little bit, but we put the rest of it in the ground, and the plants are going to use, say, 50% of what you apply, but the other 50% goes back down in the soil, and it recharges itself. So it's this kind of a cyclical recharging system. So now when you go to precision irrigation with drip irrigation, where you can put exactly the number of water in the root zone of the plant, which makes the plant really happy, it produces more crop, and it uses less water. But the problem is we're not using excess water to push the salts that are accumulating in the ground down back into the soil. And so you have a double problem. You have salt buildup, but now you also aren't using the excess water to push it back into the aquifer and recharge itself. So we're kind of defeating the purpose of. So we lose some to evaporation, but we're not really percolating a lot of water back down to the ground. So
everybody got into it and everything, which is a great deal, but it is kind of old technology. It's been around for a long time.
Well, you'd be surprised though. There's still a lot of people putting stuff in without drip. Is
that right?
Yeah. There's in the Fresno Irrigation District area, out towards Kerman, you still see. I was driving the other day and I saw a new almond orchard going in that was on flood irrigation and not drip, which is really unusual to see today.
Yeah.
And this lack of water pumping is going to pretty much make alfalfa growing, which is one of our largest crops here in the valley, basically disappear because.
Is that right?
Yeah,
alfalfa's big. Huh?
It uses too much. Yeah, it has been long term.
Yeah.
But it uses a lot of water, but it's good for the soil, and that water percolates in the soil and goes back down to the aquifer, which is good. But the way the water rules are written now, it uses about 5 acre foot of water to produce a crop.
Oh.
And so they're going to be limited on that. They can use that same 5 acre foot to grow 2 or 3 other kind of crops. So it would have more value. So that's what's going to happen.
And they're also, they're running into, I've been reading a lot about fertilizer, in the last few months, and, Canada and potash and all this other stuff. So can you explain a little bit about that?
Well, a lot of our phosphorus and potash, which is potassium, come from other countries, and the COVID thing has really affected the whole supply chain. So when we talk about, we went through a time period where stuff was on the shelves, and it was for the disruption of the supply chain. We hear a lot about how the ships off of the California coast are backed up for months to try to get unloaded.
Yeah.
So it creates this unbalance in the whole system.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing happens in these fertilizer markets. Is sometimes they can't get the product here on time, so you create a shortage, and that creates this disruption, and sometimes you can't get product, and if you can get it, the transportation has doubled or tripled, and so there's a lot of expense involved. So that's the challenge: is where is the fertilizer coming from? Do we import it? Do we produce it domestically? And how do we get it here logistically? Because it's bulky and it's heavy.
How do we get it here?
Right, and that's sometimes the bigger issue.
Yeah, I used to work in logistics, and I worked and I knew how I sold to the docks,
Sure.
and the DCs, and the mom and pops and the stores. I did the complete chain, and the way I explained it to people is there's limited, there's limited ground, okay, to do things. These ships, okay, and they're all going, well, it's the trucks. Well, no, it's the whole thing. It starts at the shipping, and then it gets to the trucks, and that backs up, and then it goes to the DC. And I was trying to explain, the DC and how that works. It's like, okay, there's 1 through 100 docks. That's it.
Right.
Okay, there's 1 to 100 out. That's it.
Right.
Okay, there's no more docks being made.
Right.
You can't just make a DC. I mean, it's going to take years, and they're not planned for that, So you've got the same thing as ships. Well, they can run. Florida says, well, you can run our ships over here, and it's like, no, you can't, because the ship's a certain size, and it doesn't make it through there, and that's just lip service that you're getting.
Sure.
Right? They made certain ships to come into our Oakland ports, and certain smaller ships to go around the other way.
Right.
So there's that. And I guess they're parking them out of Mexico or something now, and they're hiding them.
Well, what's funny is so we heard all this really in the fall last year about how this was really going to impact our economy.
Yeah.
And the ships weren't being processed. But what's funny, the Long Beach port. I read an article out recently that said that they processed more freight than they've ever processed in the last year, and it wasn't just a little bit. It was like 150% of their record.
Yeah.
So they're doing their part to get the ships unloaded. And then I hear it's the lack of trucks being able to go into the port and remove it. But then you hear that there's a record number of trucks coming in and out.
Yeah,
everybody's blaming somebody, but for some reason it just seems to be out of balance. And
they can blame each other, but it's the whole thing. It's not just one entity. It's not the trucks. It's not the boat. It's everything got blocked up because of the shipping.
Well, and the other thing I've heard that's going on here too is a friend of mine is a farmer in Hanford, and he has a commercial property in Goshen, near Goshen, and he's going to build a big 1 million square foot warehouse on a piece of ground he has there, and he was explaining to me, and this is news to me, but he said that what's happened is a lot of these box stores like Home Depot and any of the stores here, they used to require it was all just-in-time inventory. So they would ship it from China, it would come into the port, then it'd get trucked to the DC, and there's always this rolling inventory. Well, now because of the COVID thing and this supply chain disruption, these companies are requiring their suppliers to maintain a 3-month supply of dresses or cordless drills in a warehouse within a 5-hour drive of the distribution center.
Right.
So they no longer will accept this rolling inventory from China because they can't get it here.
Right.
So he says that's totally disrupted the whole distribution chain because they're having to fill up these storages to have extra supply that needs to get to the stores to have a backup for 2 or 3 months worth of supply.
So what they did was, and people don't understand too, because I dealt with Lowe's and everybody,
Sure.
and it's like all that stuff. It's a warehouse. They don't buy stuff like I invented this product. I'm going to sell it to Lowe's. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
Okay, they sell you shelf space.
Sure.
Okay, and that's it.
Right.
So now what they're doing, I guess from what you say, is Now they're telling the manufacturers you've got to have an inventory somewhere.
Yeah. It's not just before where, let's say there's 10 containers a month coming into the port. Well, now they're saying, okay, well, you can still bring your 10 containers a month, but we need to have 20 containers of inventory sitting in a warehouse within a 5-hour drive of our DC, so that we can make sure that we've got stuff for our customers.
Yeah. So now I've got to have millions of dollars sitting somewhere, interest-free.
Yeah.
Okay, so prices are going to go up.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. That's exactly what's.
And the same thing happens. And we're seeing this on the agricultural side on a lot of the inputs where a good example is a year ago, Roundup was selling for about $20 a gallon.
Yeah.
Okay. Today, Roundup is selling for about $65 a gallon, and you can't get it. It's hard to get.
Right.
And so growers are having to buy a whole year's of supply to get it physically on their property and tie up the money, because if they rely on their ag retailer to have it, they may call up when they need it and they don't have it. And we've seen supplies on certain chemicals to be almost non-existent.
So how does that go with regulations? Can they even do that?
Yeah, no, they can, as long as they can, as long as they have the way the pesticides work here in California is you need a pest control advisor licensed by the state to write a recommendation to allow a grower to buy chemicals that are restricted, not fertility products, but pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Now, when you go outside of the state of California, like say to Iowa, they don't have that regulation. A farmer can call up the local retailer and buy whatever he wants. He doesn't need a pest control advisor to write him a recommendation. The state doesn't regulate that, but it does here in California. So they have a little extra steps to go through. But this supply problem, and then the price. To give a good example, a year ago in February, we bought UN32. It's sold by the ton, which is a big nitrogen fertilizer, for $215 a ton. That was last February, right before the farm show. UN32 today is about $720 a ton.
Whoa.
Yeah. The same is with the phosphorus products, the same with the potassium products. Yeah. And then on the potassium products, some of them you couldn't even get. So guys had to do different things. So there a lot of growers are using a lot more compost this year. Composted dairy manure, because it's got a high nutrient content. It's a little more expensive than it used to be, more expensive than the commercial fertilizer, but now with the commercial fertilizer quadrupling in price for nitrogen, you can now afford to put compost on.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is good for the soil, but it cycles different. So the yields can be a little affected because the nitrogen isn't always quite available as quickly as it needs to be with a synthetic. You can, a synthetic fertilizer, you apply it to the soil and bam, within a couple of days, the plant's uptaking it. Well, fertilizer with compost, you put it on in the fall and the spring, and then the warmer the soil temperature gets, the more the microbial community works, and the more it releases of those nutrients. But Mother Nature controls that cycle, as opposed to when you can use a synthetic, you can control it. We can control it with application type.
Yeah.
So it changes the way that works a bit. But a lot of growers have had to apply compost to make up for the lack of fertility products.
Now, can you do a compost through the drip system?
No. Yeah, you can't do that. So what you would do is normally what they would do is they apply the compost to the soil in the fall when they do their groundwork, and then they work it into the soil, and then it kind of sits all winter. And then when the soil starts to warm up, then it starts to become available.
That's a whole nother labor.
I mean, it's good for the soil, which is good.
Yeah.
But it's
labor intensive,
a little more challenging for the nutrient uptake.
Jeez. I've always said if farmers can take their land and go somewhere else, they would.
Well, the other thing too, I have some farmers now that have the ability to sell water.
Oh yeah.
And some of the row crop farmers, they've told me when they sit down with a calculator, it's actually, if they sold their water for a season, they would make more money than if they did farming. For that year. But the thing is a lot of growers, one, it's their life to farm. Two, a lot of the larger vertically integrated farmers, they really care about their workforce, and they want to keep those people working. Sure. Because if they're not farming, then that ground sits idle. There's no employment, and those people can't feed their families. So, it's funny with this ground that's being fallow on the west side. Probably the single biggest thing I've heard from farmers is not only belly aching about the fact that the regulation and they can't farm because of lack of water, but what this is doing to their people. This is really hurting my farm worker base, because these people rely on me for years to give them good jobs and pay them well and treat them well. And now I'm having to lay them off because I have nothing. I'm reducing my need.
Yeah, well, it's like you lived in Reedley and everything, and it's all these outskirt, cities that support the farming industry that are going to be suffering the most.
Sure. Yep.
And there's a lot of them, and they've grown. And
well, you can just go down the valley. You start Dos Palos, Los Banos, Fireball, Mendota, Tranquility, San Joaquin, Hanford, Lemoore. All these to Pixley, all these little towns, and then that doesn't even count on the east side. I mean, all these towns are agriculturally supported towns, and they rely on these farmers to be profitable and to keep coming back. And the water thing is really impacting their ability to do that.
Oh yeah, the orange industry, is huge out there, and just everything, the nuts and everything, and I don't know where it's going to go, but these farmers, I'm glad they're as good as they are in business. But I guess more for less.
Well, yeah, and then and that was one of the reasons why I made the move from my company I was at and had this opportunity with this new company, because this new company, AgTechnovation, this South African based company, they operate in Australia, New Zealand, Spain, South Africa, Brazil, the U.S. and what they do for their growers in other parts of the world is they really implement these precision agricultural techniques to reduce inputs, to make them more specific and get them more efficient. And so that to me was the appeal, is to be able to take what I'm doing at California Ag Solutions, which is a great company, but now with the resources that this company has, that's more focused on efficiency and precision agriculture, incorporating a little more technology and a little different type of product base, to be able to bring a new level of expertise to my growers and to be able to help a wider grower base across the valley and the state is what really appealed to me to make the change.
Yeah. I looked up your new company, and what I saw is people that understand to do things differently.
Correct.
Okay, and we can't do things the California way anymore. It's kind of it's not really working in a lot of aspects. So these other national companies and national people, they have a different way of doing things, and we need to take a hard look at them.
Right, right. And what they told me was what was interesting, and where they've had struggled in California with implementation of their fertility programs, is that California farming is reliant on precision agriculture as much as other parts of the world, because other parts of the world, like in Australia, New Zealand, the input prices have been high for a long time.
Yeah.
And so they've had to learn, they're farther down the road of learning to do more with less.
Yeah.
California has been blessed with fairly cheap inputs compared to how they are now. So they've been fairly cheap. We've had fairly, obviously the water's not super plentiful, but we've had good water supplies over time, and we have excellent soils and amazing weather.
Yeah.
So sometimes if fertilizer was cheap, the growers didn't have to, if they put on a little more, it wasn't a big deal. They get a little more benefit out of it. It's great. But these other countries, when fertilizer's already been at these high prices for a long time, they've had to start to squeeze. And when you start to do that squeezing on the input side, you really have to balance what you're cutting out and reducing and what your yields look like. Because the one thing about our regulation and the cost of doing business in California, these growers cannot really stomach much of a reduction in yield.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of innovation in farming is starting to come out. Well, it's probably been doing it for a long time, but out of those states that you mentioned and Australia, there's a lot. I noticed a lot of stuff coming out of Australia and the way they do things because it's so harsh there. Well,
and they're they grow almonds in Australia too, and their soil is not near as good as California's and not as deep. Mm-hmm. So they basically almost treat those trees like they're growing them in pots almost. I mean, they're not in pots, but their topsoil might be only a couple feet, 2-3 feet deep.
Wow.
Where here we have topsoil that's 6 to 10 foot deep.
Yeah.
So when they do that, they have to manage their inputs super, super close because they're constantly spoon feeding the trees. And so consequently, when they start to do that, the trees perform at a very high level with a resource that's not near what we have in California. So what my new company is really focused on is being able to bring that same technology here and help growers really start to limit their inputs and continue to increase their yields with less.
Yeah, that's outstanding.
Yeah.
So how do people get a hold of you? How do they find you?
So they, I'm pretty prolific on LinkedIn, so I'm pretty active there. I post a lot of stuff there. I like to put out what I'm doing with
That's
some
good.
of the crazy ideas that we
Yeah.
do, just because people like to see that. They can email me. They can contact me on my cell phone right now. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Yeah, just look you up and look your company up and
Correct.
everything. How do they get a hold of your company?
Okay, so my cell phone number is easy. It's 559-908-0112.
There you go.
And then my email, the easiest one is Cary, Cary, CRUM at iCloud.com. That's my personal email. It's just, I can give you my AgTechnovation one, but it's long. So,
Yeah.
but that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. I get a lot of inquiries now through LinkedIn. A lot of growers are finding me there because they're looking for help.
Yeah.
And sometimes I can help them, and sometimes I can't. But I always try to do the best I can and understand what their problems are. And if I can't help them, I certainly know people that can.
Yeah.
And so I'll direct them. Sometimes the problems that they're having are not something that are in my particular expertise.
Yeah.
But I have growers that have the same kind of problems, and I can connect growers with another another connection that can help them. So
Sure.
I try to be pretty well versed across all of the production practices, but at least having a knowledge of them. But some of the things I'm not as well versed in as I should be or could be. But there's only so much to do in a day.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I've learned a lot, and I hope everybody else is. And have a great day.
Well, I will. Thanks. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come and
hit
speak
that
to you.
hot road.
Exactly.
We'll
All
see you
right.
later.
Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
That was great, man.
Oh, good.
That was an hour.